seeing all breadth. Seeing all breadth of knowledge. We have people who've never don't know what it is, haven't heard of it before, kind of know what it is, interested to know what it is. So a REET stands for Real Estate Excise Tax. And the entire sort of purpose of this Lunch and Learn today is that it is an underutilized tool for affordable housing. And so that is what we are going to talk about. We're going to define it. We're going to learn what it means and how it's used. We're going to learn about how it's currently used in Seattle and across the state more broadly. And finally, we're going to vision a little bit how REITs could be used for more affordable housing. And we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and kind of discussion about what is in the future for us. So what is a REIT? As I mentioned, REET is an acronym for Real Estate Excise Tax. But REET isn't just one tax. It's actually a bunch of different taxes under an umbrella that all fit into this category of REET. And they can be layered onto the same real estate transaction. So one sale of a house might have multiple different REET taxes on it. There are within Washington, every property has the opportunity to use the existing ones. There's a state REIT that exists right now, and there is also a optional REIT that local cities and counties can implement, and most of them do. I would say the vast majority in Washington have also implemented REIT 1 and 2. In Seattle, we have also implemented REIT 1 and 2. So effectively, in Seattle right now, there are 3 REITs. There's the one that more broadly serves the state and generates revenue for the state. And then there is a local REIT that that is more focused on Seattle. So the state REIT, let's start there. Basically, the state REIT is an opportunity for us to fund our general fund. So we basically pull in money on every real estate transaction that goes into the general fund, which is basically just the biggest pot of money that the state has that they can use for all of their different needs. It's not specifically a housing tool. Right now, the state REIT gets broken down. About 80% of anything that comes in from that state REIT goes to this general fund that I mentioned. About 14% goes to the Education Legacy Trust account. About 5% goes to public works and utility support. And housing really has no direct allocation out of the state REIT. The only bit of the revenue that goes to housing is penalties for people who don't pay their state REIT tax. If they get penalized on that, their penalties will start flowing into our state housing trust fund, which is used for supporting affordable housing. So in general, while obviously all of these other things that are being funded through our general fund absolutely support a thriving community, they are not specific to housing. The state REIT is also a graduated tax. So this gets a little complicated. Don't let this slide overwhelm you. This is just to kind of give you an example. This whole talk is going to be a little bit wonky, I warn you, but don't worry about that. You don't have to get it all the first time around. It's going to be a concept that we're talking about a lot. And these slides will be available if you want to take a peek at them more closely. We'll have the recording of this so that you can revisit it. So basically the way that the state REIT works is graduated. It's kind of like how income tax brackets work. Each tier of the REIT applies to that section of the overall sale price. So if, for example, a house sells for $1 million, the first $525,000 of that sale, there's going to be a 1.1% tax applied to that. And then as that margin grows, we sort of get into those higher numbers, these more expensive homes, it graduates. So say, for example, if you have a home that's selling for $4 million, that last million above $3 million is going to get taxed pretty heavily at 3% on this REIT to sort of compensate for the levels of appreciation that are happening on the real estate asset. So that's sort of how it works. It's this graduated tax that goes into the state general fund. And an important factor that will come up later, a little foreshadowing, is that this is tiered by the total sale price of the unit. So it's just a number on a sheet of paper about the transaction. How much was this transaction? The tax does not care if that was 100 apartments or one big mansion. It only cares what the dollar amount was. And this is one of the biggest criticisms of REIT taxes, is that it's not differentiating between a huge billionaire's compound and a multifamily property that's housing 50 families. So that's the state REIT. Now I'm going to dive into our local REIT options that I mentioned 1 and 2. So the state enacted a code, an RCW, that allows for any locality in Washington to implement these local REITs 1 and 2. Most of them, as I mentioned, have done that. So these are, in addition, when a home is sold, that state REIT that we just talked about, taxed. After that state REIT, there is an additional tax on top of the REIT, these local REITs, 1 and 2. And each 1 and 2 is 0.25%. So together, they make 0.5% additional tax onto a real estate transaction, which goes directly into the locality. In our case, that goes directly into Seattle. And that money, per the state's rules around REIT taxes, is restricted. The city can't use it for whatever they want. They have to use it for only REIT allowable costs. So they can use it for capital projects, streets, bridges, water, sewer, lots of infrastructure and community resources. Again, all huge components of what makes our communities thrive and incredibly important. And in fact, these REIT 1 and 2s are some of the most important revenue sources for parks and other places in our communities that can struggle to get funding. This is one of the only revenue streams that they have. And this is especially true for smaller, more rural municipalities that have less of a tax base. That being said, we're in a housing crisis, right? So there's been a push for a really long time to reallocate some of those REIT dollars back to housing. The logic makes sense. People are thinking this is a real estate transaction. Housing prices keep going up and up and up and up. We have to recapture some of that, right? And so there's been a lot of pressure to redirect REIT funding towards housing. So since 2021, there's been a carve out that's been created that can go to homelessness facilities or to support affordable housing. But there's really strict rules around that carve out. Say the city of Seattle wants to use that carve out, they can only use $100,000 or up to 35% of their available funds. They also can only use it for capital. So they can't use it to maybe say support mental health treatment, support case management and outreach services and the staffing that's needed to do that. Help our nonprofit affordable housing operators stay afloat. They can't put funding into those types of efforts. They can only put it into capital projects, which is really limiting. So now I want to show you how this works in practice. I took an example of a recent real estate transaction. This is a big luxury building on First Hill that sold in 2025. It sold for $173 million. And so I took it and I broke out what the REIT taxes would have been on that sale. And so you can see along the bottom of the screen, these are the different tiers of the state REIT. We talked about that earlier, right? So you can see here, this is the first $500,000 of that sale. It barely got taxed, not very much at all. But now here, the huge value on this, the luxury value on this is getting taxed much more heavily. And that's what I meant by that graduated tax. So that's the state that you can see in green. All that money went into the state revenue pot. Then you have the local REIT 1 and 2 stacked on top. And you can see that here. There's the 0.25 and the 0.25. And those both went into Seattle. The total REIT revenue on this transaction was over $6 million. So that is not peanuts when it comes to our housing crisis. This is definitely a resource that we can use to recapture some of the wealth that's being generated by just runaway housing prices. So who pays REITs and who is exempt from REITs? Typically, at the state level, all of the RCWs exempt affordable housing developers from REITs. This is a pretty common thing. And one of the major things that Juan is interested in and working to sort of figure out and ascertain right now is, will social housing also be exempt in the same way that affordable housing developers are? Because obviously, as you saw in that last slide, if the Seattle social housing developer is required to be paying REET taxes on everything they're doing, it's sort of counterintuitive to their ability to create affordable housing. So because they are building permanently affordable community assets, we want them to be exempt. There is a chance that they're already exempt under the RCW. There is work being done at the Seattle social housing developer to learn whether they will be exempt or not. And as that unfolds, we will keep our base informed. But if they're not exempt, one of our goals is to make sure that they become exempt. And so you'll hear more about that as we move towards the legislative session. But that's one major exemption to the REET, is affordable housing developers or people who are generating community housing assets, right? There are additional exemptions for individuals on REET taxes. There's a whole list of them you can go online and look at, but I pulled some examples, things like an inheritance, or if you get divorced, you're able to avoid paying the REET if you're trying to buy out your ex-partner, or if you have to re-record a deed because something was mistaken on your deed, that's an obvious exemption. So there's many types of common sense exemptions like that that are available to people. And again, as I mentioned, social housing should have all the same exemptions that any other affordable housing developer does. One other thing that is sort of in this realm that I wanted to talk with you guys about is the fact that within the affordable housing REITs, which I'm about to talk with you next, and I will reiterate this at the end, affordable housing REITs actually require buyers to pay at least half. There is a current effort at the state level to create broader affordable housing REITs, but under the current state law, they have to also be paid by buyers. And so I'll explain this more. I'll revisit the slide at the end because this is a really important one, but I'm just wanting to introduce it now. Right now, the way the REIT is structured for affordable housing, groups like Community Land Trust or Habitat for Humanity end up getting disproportionately impacted because their very low income buyers are also paying the REIT. So in a similar way to how I was just talking about how we don't want our social housing developer to pay back in REIT taxes because it's counterintuitive, we also don't want low income first time home buyers to be paying REIT taxes to the extent that that's possible. The idea with a REIT tax is when you're cashing out, when you're selling out and you're making all that profit, you're putting some money back into the system. So that's another one of the challenges. And again, we'll revisit this concept in a minute, but I just wanted to introduce that to you to get your wheels turning on it. So that brings me to my secret third option, right? You're hearing me say affordable housing REIT. You haven't said anything about an affordable housing REIT. You've been talking about infrastructure and REIT 1 and 2 and all these things, right? So there is actually a state RCW right now that allows for a third category of REIT. We've talked about the state REIT, the local REIT, and this secret third option of REIT, which is called an affordable housing REIT. The affordable housing REIT is authorized at the state level right now. That's an additional 0.5% shared between the buyer and seller, as I was just describing, that is dedicated exclusively to affordable housing. So again, this would be a third type of REIT that is allowable at the state level and is focused on building, acquiring, rehabbing housing for low and moderate income people, exactly who social housing serves. So why don't we have this? There is a statute that locks this tool behind a conservation REIT requirement. This is a little complicated, but when this RCW that created this affordable housing REIT came to fruition, it was reliant on state statute that was created in the early 1990s, before we had the Growth Management Act, before we had comp planning, before we had all the work that FutureWise does and all of the work that we're all doing together to move comp planning forward. There were conversations happening at the state level about creating an affordable housing REIT. 1990. And so because people were worried about runaway development and developers going crazy with kind of not considering conservation needs, which was a valid fear in the 80s and early 90s, they created at the state level, when they wrote this RCW, this requirement for a conservation REIT. And Tara could probably tell us in the chat when the Growth Management Act passed, but early 90s, the Growth Management Act passes and kind of made that moot because the Growth Management Act does that. Yes, so right around the same time, the Growth Management Act, Tara says 1990 in the chat. So this is all happening at once, right? But in the way that we know legislation goes, this is kind of grandfathered in, this requirement for a conservation REIT being put in place before January 1st, 2003. Now, there's only one county in the whole state of Washington that put a conservation REIT in place before January 1st, 2003, and that was San Juan County. So they are the only county in Washington that has ever been able to create an affordable housing dedicated REIT. And they have done so. They launched one in 2018, and they have distributed $16 million across 15 projects since then. Right now, there's an effort at the state level to change that, to unlock that, to remove that conservation requirement, because again, we have the Growth Management Act now. We have conservation planning requirements for every single municipality in Washington that do protect our wildlands, that do protect our goals for conservation lands, right? So right now there is an effort at the state level through Alex Romel's office to create a vehicle that will open that up to the rest of the state and allow other localities to create a dedicated affordable housing REIT. And unlike those local REIT funds that I mentioned earlier, this REIT and the way that it's used in San Juan County especially has shown us that it can help keep housing running long term. It can be used for operational costs. It can be incredibly flexible money that localities can use to meet their distinct affordable housing needs. So I wanted to give us like a frame of reference of what that might look like in King County if we did this, if we were to do an affordable housing REIT right now. And so I pulled some data. I wanted to look at it. King County's real estate transaction base for 2025, there were just shy of 48,000 real estate transactions that generated a whole lot of money. And that $181 million that was collected via our existing REIT 1 and 2 went into Seattle's city budget and helped us create parks and public resources all across the city. So if we had an additional third REIT that was generating an additional 0.5%, which is exactly what the REIT 1 and 2 generates, we would basically double that amount. If we had had that additional third affordable housing REIT in 2025, we would have generated another $180 million for affordable housing that could be not only used to build it, but also operate it. So again, I wanted to give us a frame of reference. Like, what does this mean? Because these are all just giant numbers, you know, like what could that money actually do? And where does it sit in the frame of everything else that we are working on as a community? So right now, the full year 2026 Seattle Office of Housing budget is $350 million. So to go back to this slide, that $181 million number is a pretty significant amount, pretty significant portion of the total Seattle Office of Housing budget. It's also pretty much equivalent to the proposed budget that the King County Regional Housing Authority had put together for 2025, right? So these huge agencies that are mapping what they think they need, it's really telling how much this could generate to support our housing goals as a community. And that's not to say that we should use an affordable housing REIT to fund a city office of housing or anything like that. I just wanted to give us a dollar amount that we could compare it to. Another data point that I pulled is, what is the funding gap? What does King County see as the funding gap? And right now, per our 2025 countywide housing needs assessment, we have a funding gap of $4 billion per year, which is a crazy number to think about. But even within that, this REIT, it's a small amount, but that's an automatic, immediate 5% of that gap closed. And we've got to start somewhere. This is a tool that already exists for us to use. So what are some of the challenges with this magical tool I am trying to sell you? First challenge is it's a speculative market. It relies on really, it relies on real estate moving up and down and home prices moving up and down. One of the reasons San Juan County has been able to generate so much REIT revenue is because home prices in San Juan County are so absurdly high. So that's a little bit, it's never good when our revenue sources are reliant on the market continuing to go up and up and up. That's not ever a good long-term solution for our communities. But in the short term, when we are stuck in this speculative market and we are seeing these home prices rise, it can be a very useful tool to us. Again, thinking about that, what I just mentioned, the converse of that, similarly to how San Juan County is able to generate lots and lots of revenue because there's lots of millionaires with big houses on San Juan Island, more rural or isolated or less resourced economically communities, they're going to have a much harder time generating that kind of revenue because home prices just aren't as high in their areas. So they're negatively impacted by that. Again, one of the challenges that people have pointed out historically with the state REET is that it doesn't do enough for affordable housing itself, considering it's a tax that's being pulled from the real estate industry. And the last critique is the one that I mentioned earlier. Both the state and the local REIT are paid completely by the seller. The idea is you're profiting from this house, you're cashing out from this real estate transaction. This is you putting some money back into the community. That third affordable housing REIT that we've been talking about doesn't work that way. The state requires it to be split between the buyer and the seller, and it actually stipulates that the buyer needs to pay at least half of the REIT. And that can be really difficult. I can tell you from experience working in a community land trust on San Juan Island that when our first-time home buyers would come in and be trying to be so close on their debt to income ratios to getting their mortgages, that could make the difference of whether they could buy their home or not. So it does very, very seriously impact low income and first time home buyers. And so that's something that's really important to consider as we look at changes to this at the state. So what are some of these changes? I'm going to go through these. This is another one of these slides that's super complicated. Don't let it overwhelm you. I'm just kind of giving you a broad overview. And I mean, you all know at Han, we're here to help learn. So if folks want to follow up on this, if they're really into it, we're available for that. There's been a couple approaches to address the challenges that I mentioned. One is the one I call the Frank Chop approach. Rep Frank Chop in 2023 tried to basically create what the nickname for it was a mansion tax. And so basically trying to add an additional, we showed that graduated REIT earlier in the presentation where the highest value on the transaction was being taxed at 3% rather than 1%. What Frank Chop's proposal was to actually create another tier that's at 4%. And it did get pretty far. It passed through committees and got into rules, but it never got a floor vote. And then folks kind of built on that. Rep. April Berg ran a bill the following session, and that bill really specifically shifted the money towards housing. So it took what Frank Chop's bill did, and it added a requirement that all of those funds would be specifically earmarked for the Housing Trust Fund, Apple Health and Homes, Affordable Housing for All, and other housing programs. So that was a super good next step, but the bill still didn't get through. It still kind of struggled in spite of the changes to it. And so that's the detail in that next paragraph is explaining what happened to that bill. So it had kind of moved forward and then halted. So right now we have two bills that are live that are trying to deal with a REIT. They are both basically doing the same thing. House Bill 1867 and House Bill 1480, both prime sponsored by Rep. Alex Ramel, who's up in Whatcom County. They're both in the Finance Committee right now. Neither one of them got out of committee last session, and so they're still just kind of sitting there in purgatory and need advocates to holler for them to get them moving. And what these bills do, they take a different approach than the mansion tax. They say, let the state REIT do what it's doing. Let the REIT 1 and 2 do what they're doing. What we need to do is broaden the affordable housing REIT. We need to allow for the affordable housing REIT that San Juan County has to go all across the state so that every locality can create their own affordable housing revenue source. And so that is what these two bills do. There are some very subtle differences that we're still learning about. Jeff and I are actually scheduled to meet with their office within the next week. I think we're scheduled to meet with them pretty soon. I can't remember the exact date. And we are working on, again, building information, but we want to start educating our base on this because REET is likely to be an important topic in this year's legislative session. And so I'm going to stop sharing there. We can pull back up these slides. We have plenty of time for Q&A, which is good because these are really difficult concepts. And I want to make sure that we've got it. Hang on, give me one sec. I'm going to change my screen so I can see you guys. Here we go. So I've been talking a lot. I'm going to stop there and we can shift into Q&A.
Shout out, Amanda. Thank you so much for that super informative presentation. Can we get some round off in the chat or some, yeah, let's get those reactions going.
Woo, thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I ask a question?
Also, really quick, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here so folks can feel free if you want to come on but don't want to be recorded. All right, bye, all of our online listeners.